The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Judge Lake as she held up the DNA test results. Keith Mccrory Sr. sat stiffly, his hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of fear and anger. His wife, Rose, sat beside him, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling. Their 3-year-old son, Keith Jr., was at the center of this storm. The question hanging in the air was simple yet devastating. Was Keith Jr. really Keith Sr.'s son? Or was his great-uncle the father of his daughter? Judge Lake's voice broke the silence. In the case of 3-year-old Keith Mccrory Jr., it has been determined by this court. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. Keith Sr. held his breath, his heart pounding. Rose whispered a prayer under her breath. The audience leaned forward, eager to hear the verdict. Judge Lake continued, "Mr. Mccrory, you are the father." The room erupted in applause. Rose burst into tears, relief washing over her. Keith Sr. sat frozen, his emotions a whirlwind of joy, confusion, and lingering doubt. But as the applause died down, Judge Lake's stern voice cut through the celebration. "Congratulations, but this isn't the end. Meet me in my chambers. We need to talk." The screen faded to black, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats. Before we dive deeper into this emotional roller coaster, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us grow and bring you more gripping stories like this one. Thank you in advance for being part of our community. The story began months earlier, when Keith Sr. and Rose's marriage was already hanging by a thread. It all started with a shocking revelation in this very courtroom. Their daughter, Nivea, was not Keith Sr.'s biological child. The paternity test had revealed a truth that shattered their family. Keith Sr. was devastated. He had always believed Nivea was his daughter, but the DNA results proved otherwise. The betrayal cut deep, and his trust in Rose was broken. After the Nivea case, Keith Sr. couldn't shake the doubt that had crept into his mind. If Nivea wasn't his, what about their son, Keith Jr.? The thought haunted him. He loved Keith Jr. with all his heart, but the fear that he might not be his biological son was too much to bear. He needed answers, even if it meant risking his marriage. Rose, on the other hand, was confident. She swore Keith Jr. was Keith Sr.'s son. She had no doubts. But Keith Sr. couldn't ignore the fact that they had broken up for a few days around the time Keith Jr. was conceived. During that time, Rose had admitted to sleeping with someone else, Keith Sr.'s great-uncle. The thought made Keith Sr. sick to his stomach. How could he trust her after that? The tension between them grew unbearable. Keith Sr. demanded a paternity test for Keith Jr., and Rose reluctantly agreed. They found themselves back in Judge Lake's courtroom, facing the same judge who had delivered the devastating news about Nivea. The stakes were high. If Keith Jr. wasn't his son, Keith Sr. wasn't sure he could stay in the marriage. The trust was already broken, and this could be the final blow. As the trial began, Judge Lake questioned Rose about the breakup and her relationship with Keith Sr.'s great-uncle. Rose admitted that she had slept with him during the brief separation but insisted it was a mistake. She claimed she was 1000% sure Keith Jr. was Keith Sr.'s son. But Keith Sr. wasn't convinced. He couldn't forget the betrayal he felt when he found out about Nivea. He needed proof. The courtroom was filled with emotional highs and lows. Rose broke down in tears, pleading with Keith Sr. to believe her. Keith Sr. struggled to hold back his anger, his voice shaking as he spoke about the pain of not knowing if his son was truly his. The audience watched in silence, captivated by the raw emotion unfolding before them. Judge Lake ordered a lie detector test for Rose to determine if she was telling the truth. The results were shocking. Rose admitted to sending racy pictures to other men and sleeping with someone else during their marriage. The lie detector also indicated she was being deceptive when she claimed Keith Jr. was Keith Sr.'s son. The tension in the room was palpable. Keith Sr. looked at Rose with a mix of anger and heartbreak. How could he trust her now? As the trial continued, the DNA results were finally ready. Judge Lake held up the envelope, the room holding its breath. She read the results. Keith Sr. was the father of Keith Jr. The audience erupted in applause, and Rose cried tears of relief. But Judge Lake's stern reminder that this wasn't the end left everyone wondering what would happen next. The courtroom doors closed behind Keith Sr. and Rose as they followed Judge Lake into her chambers. The weight of the DNA results hung heavily in the air. Keith Jr. was Keith Sr.'s son, but the damage to their marriage was far from repaired. Judge Lake sat behind her desk, her expression stern but compassionate. She looked at the couple who sat across from her, their faces etched with exhaustion and pain. "This isn't just about paternity," Judge Lake began, her voice firm. "This is about trust, honesty, and whether or not your marriage can survive the lies and betrayal. Keith, you've been through a lot. First Nivea and now this. Rose, you've admitted to mistakes, but the question is, can you rebuild the trust you've broken?" Keith Sr. sat silently, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the floor. Rose wiped her tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I know I messed up, Your Honor. I know I hurt him. But I love Keith and I love our family. I just want to make things right." Judge Lake leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Love isn't enough, Rose. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and right now that foundation is cracked. Keith, do you think you can move past this?" Keith Sr. hesitated, his voice low and filled with emotion. "I don't know, Your Honor. I love my son and I'm relieved he's mine. But every time I look at Rose, all I see is the lies. I don't know if I can get past that." The tension in the room was palpable. Judge Lake sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to help you see the truth and make the best decision for your family. But I will say this. If you want to save your marriage, it's going to take a lot of work from both of you. Keith, you'll need to forgive. Rose, you'll need to earn back his trust. It won't be easy, but it's possible." The screen faded to black, leaving viewers wondering if Keith Sr. and Rose could find a way to heal their broken relationship. The story then flashed back to the days leading up to the trial, revealing the events that brought Keith Sr. and Rose to this breaking point. After the shocking revelation about Nivea's paternity, Keith Sr. had become consumed by doubt. He couldn't shake the feeling that Rose had been hiding more from him. The thought that Keith Jr. might not be his son tormented him, and he began to distance himself from Rose. Rose, on the other hand, was desperate to save their marriage. She knew she had made mistakes, but she believed Keith Jr. was Keith Sr.'s son. She tried to reassure him, but her words fell on deaf ears. The more she tried to convince him, the more he pulled away. One evening, the tension between them reached a boiling point. Keith Sr. confronted Rose, his voice filled with anger and pain. "How can I trust you, Rose? You lied to me about Nivea. How do I know you're not lying about Keith Jr.?" Rose's eyes filled with tears as she pleaded with him. "Keith, I swear to you, Keith Jr. is your son. I made a mistake, but I would never lie to you about this. Please, you have to believe me." But Keith Sr. couldn't let go of his doubts. "I need to know for sure, Rose. I can't live with this uncertainty. We need to do a paternity test." Rose reluctantly agreed, knowing it was the only way to prove her innocence. But the decision only deepened the rift between them. As they prepared for the trial, their arguments became more frequent and more intense. The love that once held them together was being replaced by anger and mistrust. The day of the trial arrived, and the couple found themselves back in Judge Lake's courtroom. The stakes were higher than ever. If Keith Jr. wasn't Keith Sr.'s son, it could mean the end of their marriage. But even if he was, the damage to their relationship might already be too great to repair. As the trial unfolded, the emotional highs and lows kept the audience on the edge of their seats. Rose's admission of her mistakes, Keith Sr.'s raw pain, and the shocking lie detector results all added to the drama. And when the DNA results finally revealed that Keith Jr. was Keith Sr.'s son, the relief was palpable. But the question remained: could their marriage survive? The tension in Judge Lake's chambers was suffocating. Keith Sr. sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, while Rose wiped away tears with trembling hands. The DNA results had confirmed Keith Jr. was his son, but the emotional scars ran deep. Judge Lake leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. You two have a lot to work through. This isn't just about paternity anymore. It's about whether you can rebuild what's been broken. Keith Sr. finally broke his silence, his voice heavy with emotion. Your Honor, I love my son. I'm relieved he's mine. But every time I look at Rose, all I see is the lies. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Rose's tears flowed freely as she pleaded with him. Keith, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you and I love our family. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Please just give me a chance. Judge Lake interjected, her tone steady. Keith, forgiveness isn't easy, but it's necessary if you want to move forward. And Rose, trust isn't given, it's earned. You'll have to prove yourself through your actions, not just your words. This won't be easy, but if you're both willing to put in the work, there's a chance. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers hanging on Judge Lake's words. Could Keith Sr. and Rose find a way to heal, or was their marriage beyond repair? The story then shifted to the days following the trial, revealing the struggles Keith Sr. and Rose faced as they tried to navigate their fractured relationship. Keith Sr. moved out of their home temporarily, needing space to process his emotions. He spent his days working and his nights wrestling with his thoughts. He loved Keith Jr. deeply, but the betrayal he felt toward Rose was a heavy burden. Rose, meanwhile, was determined to prove herself. She focused on being the best mother she could be to Keith Jr. and Nivea, hoping her actions would show Keith Sr. she was serious about change. She reached out to him daily, sending texts and leaving voicemails, but he rarely responded. The distance between them grew, and Rose began to wonder if she had lost him for good. One evening, Keith Sr. received a call from his mother. Keith, you need to talk to Rose, she urged. You can't keep shutting her out. If you want to save your marriage, you have to be willing to try. Keith Sr. sighed, running a hand over his face. Mom, I don't know if I can. Every time I think about what she did, I can't. I understand, his mother replied gently. But remember, forgiveness isn't just for her. It's for you too. Holding on to this anger will only hurt you in the long run. Her words struck a chord with Keith Sr. He knew she was right, but the thought of facing Rose again filled him with dread. Still, he decided to meet her, if only to talk. The next day, Keith Sr. and Rose sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Finally, Rose broke the silence. Keith, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything, for lying, for hurting you, for putting our family through this. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Keith Sr. looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. Rose, I want to believe you. But how do I know you won't hurt me again? How do I know you're telling me the truth now? Rose reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it over his. You don't. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove myself. I love you, Keith. I love our family. I don't want to lose you. Keith Sr. hesitated, his heart torn between love and fear. Finally, he nodded. I'll try, Rose. But it's going to take time. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers wondering if Keith Sr. and Rose could truly rebuild their relationship. The story then shifted to a new development that added another layer of complexity to their situation. Keith Sr.'s great-uncle, the man Rose had admitted to sleeping with during their breakup, reached out to Keith Sr. The message was simple. We need to talk. Keith Sr. was hesitant but agreed to meet him. The two men sat in a park, the tension between them palpable. Keith Sr. broke the silence first. What do you want? His great-uncle sighed, his expression filled with regret. Keith, I owe you an apology. What happened between me and Rose? It was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you or cause problems in your marriage. Keith Sr. clenched his fists, his anger bubbling to the surface. You slept with my wife. How did you think that wouldn't hurt me? I know, his great-uncle replied, his voice heavy with guilt. And I'm sorry. I've been carrying this guilt for a long time, and I needed to apologize to you in person. I hope one day you can forgive me. Keith Sr. stared at him, his emotions a whirlwind of anger, pain, and confusion. Finally he stood up. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I appreciate you saying that. The confrontation with his great-uncle left Keith Sr. reeling. As he drove home, his mind raced with conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a flicker of something else, something that felt like the beginnings of understanding. He knew his great-uncle's apology didn't erase what had happened, but it was a step toward closure. Still, the question lingered. Could he truly forgive Rose? When Keith Sr. arrived home, Rose was waiting for him. She had been nervously pacing the living room, her heart pounding as she wondered where he had gone. When he walked through the door, she immediately noticed the storm in his eyes. Keith, she began cautiously, are you okay? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down heavily on the couch, running a hand over his face. I just talked to my great-uncle, he finally said, his voice low and strained. Rose's breath caught in her throat. What did he say? Keith Sr. looked at her, his expression unreadable. He apologized, said it was a mistake and that he never meant to hurt me. Rose sat down beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Keith, I know I can't undo what happened, but I hope you know how sorry I am. I never wanted to hurt you. I made a terrible mistake. Keith Sr. sighed, his shoulders slumping. Rose, I want to believe you. Really do. But every time I think about what happened, it feels like a knife to the heart. How do I move past that? Rose reached out, placing a tentative hand on his arm. I don't know, Keith. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I love you and I love our family. I don't want to lose you. Keith Sr. looked at her, his eyes searching hers for the truth. Finally he nodded. I'll try, Rose. But it's going to take time. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers wondering if Keith Sr. and Rose could truly rebuild their relationship. The story then shifted to the weeks that followed, showing the couple's efforts to heal their fractured marriage. Keith Sr. moved back home, but the atmosphere was tense. They tiptoed around each other, careful not to say or do anything that might reignite the pain. Rose was determined to prove herself, taking on more responsibilities at home and making an effort to be more open and honest with Keith Sr. One evening, as they sat together after putting the kids to bed, Rose broke the silence. Keith, I've been thinking. Maybe we should go to counseling. I think it could help us work through everything. Keith Sr. hesitated, his initial instinct to reject the idea. But then he thought about how much he loved his family and how much he wanted to make things work. Finally he nodded. Okay. Let's try it. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers hopeful but uncertain about what the future held for Keith Sr. and Rose. The story then shifted to their first counseling session. The therapist, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Dr. Carter, listened as Keith Sr. and Rose shared their story. When they finished, she leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. It's clear that you both love each other and your family. But love alone isn't enough to sustain a relationship. You need trust, communication, and a willingness to work through the hard times. Keith Sr. and Rose exchanged a glance, both knowing how much work lay ahead. Dr. Carter continued. I want you to start by setting small goals for yourselves. Keith, I want you to try to let go of some of the anger you're holding on to. Rose, I want you to focus on being transparent and honest in everything you do. It won't be easy, but if you're both committed, you can rebuild your relationship. The screen faded to black, leaving viewers with a sense of cautious optimism. The story then shifted to a new development that added another layer of complexity to their situation. Keith Sr. received a call from his ex-girlfriend, a woman he hadn't spoken to in years. She had heard about the paternity drama and wanted to check in on him. Keith, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything you've been through, she said. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Keith Sr. was caught off guard by the call. He hadn't thought about his ex in years, and her sudden reappearance stirred up old emotions. He thanked her for the call but quickly ended the conversation, unsure of how to process it. When he told Rose about the call later that evening, her face fell. Keith, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but are you sure you're over her? Keith Sr. looked at her, his expression serious. Rose, that was a long time ago. I'm with you now, and I'm committed to making this work. But you have to understand, trust goes both ways. If we're going to move forward, we both have to be honest with each other. Rose nodded, her eyes filled with determination. I understand, Keith. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes.